Right, good to go.
All right.
G'day, everybody, and welcome to episode 0, our first pre-episode of the Sports Science Collective podcast. I'm joined here today with my co-hosts Sandan Inturrisi, Jared Bailey, and Ryan Leder. Sando, I'm going to start with you, mate. We're going to do a bit of a meet and greet with all of the guys in the group, and you're to the left of my screen going around anti-clockwise, and it just so happens you're the most handsome of the group as well. So I would like to start can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you ended up finding yourself on a second-rate dodgy podcast with 3 other blokes?
Yeah, so starting with the best, obviously. So my name's Sandan. I studied a Bachelor of Exercise and Sports Science and an honours down at Deakin University, and followed that up with a Doctor of Physiotherapy at the University of Melbourne. Been working with the Sports Science Collective since it originated back in 2016, I believe. And I'm looking forward to what this podcast has in store for everybody. Bit of fun, and just looking forward to getting the information out to everyone.
So I'm really keen to have you on board. So as we'll get to the other guests in a little bit, you'll other hosts, I should say, you'll see that 3 of us are exercise scientists, as are you, but you also have a specialty in physiotherapy. So can you tell us what your honours was on, and then why you decided to go down the route of Doctor of Physiotherapy?
Yeah, so my honours research or project was on the effect of surgical procedures on shoulder instability in AFL player performance, and I guess that sort of fed into my desire around rehab science. So looking at the effect of not only surgical procedures, but injuries in particular and their effect on athletes' performance, number one, but then just your everyday, even weekend warriors' performance. And then how myself as a physio can then get someone back to, how they were, but then also improving on that and getting the best out of someone.
Yeah. So you're working now as a physiotherapist for Keys Australia. That's correct.
Yeah. So senior physio at Kaiser in Heidelberg, and then previously done a fair bit of sport work as well. So putting that sports science background into good use.
Yeah, sounds good. And sport. Speaking of sport, I'm gonna go to my next co-host, who is the best at delivering fajitas, the hottest bit of tamale in town, which is Jared Bailey, our premier cricketer. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, g'day, I'm Jared. And just to clarify, it's not my cooking prowess, nor is it my cricketing prowess, but it certainly relates to my cricketing endeavours. But yeah, my name's Jared. And I guess I'm a bit of a cricket tragic, I would say, having played cricket for, well, over 23, 24 years now. But find myself in the sports science space after completing a Bachelor of Exercise and Sports Science and an honours degree with our co-host Sandan. So we studied together from day one, which is a really nice thing. We're still sort of mates, so that's nice. But I guess,
Hey, I've just got to pull you up there, mate. So I was present during this, and I'm not sure you can class table tennis and coffee stops as study, brother.
well, I think, every university student would have, hopefully, that kind of social aspect to their degree. And perhaps the priorities around studying are perhaps secondary to socializing at times throughout the degree,
Well,
especially in undergraduate
when we
studies.
rolled down to the Deakin University Y there, and they rolled their eyes at us again because we asked for more
Another
ping
table
pong balls,
tennis.
more table tennis because we kept losing them.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pinnacle of professionalism. So
Yeah.
speaking of though, you've since changed your ways and you've just
Mm.
submitted your PhD. Can you tell
Yeah.
us a bit about that?
Yeah, exactly. So, I guess, my postdoctorate experience started with honors, and then, that sort of, I guess, whet my appetite for conducting research and studying. And my honors was on looking at accelerometer-based load in elite netball players, which was kind of my introduction to how we can use training load and playing load to enhance performance. So my PhD was actually looking at monitoring training load using heart rate based measures. And so I ended up developing a small field test that we can use to detect fatigue in athletes as a tool for monitoring training load. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I've just submitted the resubmission, so hopefully it's on its way for good now, because it's been 8 years at uni, so I'm ready to move on.
Yeah, you see nothing, mate. I've spent 11 at university. I've trumped you there. So I remember when you spoke to me initially about your PhD. I'm going to be honest. I didn't know what you were talking about, and so you studied something called heart rate on kinetics, which
Yep.
I would like to touch on a little bit later.
Yep.
But just very briefly, what is load and what are heart rate on kinetics for listeners that might not have heard either of those terms that we've kind of mentioned?
Fair enough. So training load can be divided into internal training load and external training load. And you would be most aware of external training load. The total distance that you cover in a training session, maybe in meters or kilometers, or the amount of jumps, turns, change of directions, anything that you can count that's sort of measurable externally to the human. And then we can also look at our internal training load. So measures of internal load. So heart rate measures, basically how does our body respond to the external training load that it's experiencing. And so heart rate measures are a really common measure of internal training load. Now, sort of move that forward into heart rate on kinetics, which is just, I guess, a certain way to look at how our heart responds to an exercise stimulus. So you may have heard the term heart rate variability, which is looking at sort of a longer term heart rate response to exercise. But heart rate on kinetics is more of an acute response, where we look at how fast the heart rate can accelerate from a resting level to an exercising level. And given that the heart is under such tight control by the central nervous system, longer term fatigue can have an effect on central nervous system activity, which can affect how quickly our heart rate responds to an exercise stimulus. So heart rate on kinetics looks at that acceleration rate of heart rate from rest to exercise. So under nice, restful, energetic conditions where an athlete isn't experiencing any longer term fatigue, the heart will respond really quickly to an exercise stimulus, whereas a player who's undergone sort of more longer term fatigue, so entering stages of overtraining, the heart rate response to the same exercise stimulus will be much slower, as the central nervous system is a bit slow to react because it's under some level of fatigue. So that's what heart rate on kinetics is all about.
So for someone lacking your brain power, a la me, that might be talking about how quickly the heart accelerates, and if you're fatigued, it accelerates a little slower. So
That's
that kind of
exactly
it.
right. Yep, exactly. Yep, perfect.
Well, I would love to go in and talk about a special episode about that, but in the interest of keeping things moving, I'm going to move on to the final co-host here, which is the man who has been described as a young Bert Newton in his podcast ability, which is Ryan Leder. Talk to us about your career goals and how you found yourself in this podcast, Rhino.
Yeah, thanks, Horny. Nice intro there. Well, yeah, basically, I'm just a collector of degrees at the moment. So I'm on my fourth degree, having done an undergrad in exercise science at UTAS, so back in Tassie, the only real state in Australia.
It's gotta be
Then I decided to do a master's of S&C out over in Perth, and then moved over to Geelong to jump in at Deakin with these boys, and really just run amok at Deakin, playing ridiculous games during times when we should have been studying. So I did an honours and currently doing my PhD at Deakin University.
I don't know that there's anything that stupid about tuna golf, mate. Tuna mini golf inside the office. That was a stellar game.
Or play it where it lives.
Yeah, some great games played there.
So, well, we have to go down that academic pathway. So, what did you do your honours on, and what are you studying for your PhD?
So I did my honours on load management. So I was looking at running loads from the Geelong Footy Club and trying to predict injuries based off what their running loads and their GPS loads were. Um, Basically, my findings were that we suck at predicting injuries based off GPS, which in itself is nice because it was quite a taboo topic at the time. Everyone was trying to predict injuries, but we've sort of come around a little bit to say that we can't really predict injuries because sport's so complex in its nature that looking at one measure doesn't really give us the whole picture of what's going on. So that sort of gave me a bit of an insight into sports science, working at elite levels, which sort of led me into my PhD, which is working with or working in cricket, especially or specifically fast bowlers. And I'm trying to find out what allows fast bowlers to bowl fast, and then understand how do they develop the physical traits that allow them to bowl fast. So 2 years in, hopefully within a year's time, I'm done. But yeah, that's basically what I'm doing at the moment.
And I think it's worth mentioning for our listeners also that you have a master's in strength and conditioning, which you gained at Edith Cowan University along the way. So what you said about injuries, I find really interesting. Just to go off on a tangent here, have any of us ever seen a study where anything predicts injury in sport? I'm yet to see something where something can predict injury, whether it be load, GPS, hamstring strength on an odd board, whatever. The only thing that seems to predict injury, from what I understand, is when someone heavier than you runs into you at high speed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We got lots of data now. We like to think that we can control training to try and reduce injury, but at the end of the day, there's so many more things that we don't understand in sport yet, is there?
Yeah, and I think I mean, this is kind of why this podcast started, which we'll come back in a little bit. Um, but before I talk about myself briefly, I want to just go around and kind of talk about our athletic um, or our sporting past as well. So Jared mentioned he's involved with cricket. You've also been involved with cricket, but you're a bit of a track and field enthusiast as well. That's correct, Rhino?
Yeah, it was for a while. I've since given that up and really started to focus more on cricket and a bit more on football and basketball lately. It's sort of where my passions lie at the moment.
Yeah, and Sando, what's your background in? More in AFL?
Yeah, played AFL and a bit of a hack at golf, but working now mostly with some professional boxers, mountain bike cyclists, and then have worked previously in sub-elite AFL and sub-elite soccer.
And we're a bit of a hack at golf, being described as the Italian John Daly. Talking of mountain bikers, that kind of segues nicely into my background. So I am also Ryan Warren, and I did my undergraduate degree at Federation Uni, which was then University of Ballarat, way back in 2007. Did my honours looking at a warm up protocol with sprint cyclists. So looking at a concept known as post activation potentiation, and whether or not you could employ that in a warm up to help improve sprint performance. Short answer was yes. And then I moved into my PhD at Deakin University, which was also looking at cycling, but at the other end of the spectrum, going from sprint cyclists to endurance cyclists, in particular um, time trial cyclists, and that was looking at physiological and biomechanical variables. And so my background's really in physiology and biomechanics, and as an aside, strength and conditioning from my own time as um, a kind of elite, semi-elite sprint cyclist. And so I spent a lot of time working on um, looking at economy, efficiency, biomechanical variables, etc. And now work at Federation Uni, and so I finished my PhD at Deakin, and then have managed to snag a job at Federation Uni a couple of years ago, where I teach primarily into physiology and biomechanics. So hopefully, what you will be able to kind of pick up from this group is that we have a lot of knowledge. So we have played a lot of sports and have done a lot of degrees. My sporting background is in cycling, but more recently in running, trying to run my first marathon in a couple of months' time. So we do have a reasonably wide um, base of expertise, and we are qualified, which is not something you tend to see a lot on the internet at the moment with all of the fitness Instagram accounts. And of course, we have our social media page, Sports Science Collective, which is on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube as well, which kind of backs up this idea of podcast. So while the iron's hot, I want to talk about Sports Science Collective. So, Sando, I think it was you that initially proposed the idea way back in 2016. Can you talk to us about why we started Sports Science Collective and kind of how we got to where we are?
Yeah, so I think it was a much larger group when we began. And yeah, a few of us who had been doing university together and were good mates, playing more table tennis than studying. We sort of came to the consensus that, when we had to do research, there wasn't a lot of, I guess, good quality and easy to digest pages or information out there. And, a lot of people had to digest research articles, which can be pretty challenging for, I guess, the everyday athlete or coach or
for anyone for that matter, Sando.
Yeah, for anybody, but especially those that need the information most. And so we came up with the idea of starting a group that broke down that information and put it into much more digestible pieces for exactly that, those athletes, those coaches to utilize, and free to the people.
And one thing we found ourselves in a really unique position. So we started from that lens to kind of give that information to people and try and dispel some of the myths a lot around because there are a lot of myths and the bro science, for want of a better term, is pretty common. We deal with it a lot. You would have seen terms around detoxing and ways to build muscle and certain supplements and things, and they're really not founded on science or the opposite. They're flat out untrue. And so we started this page or social media idea to try and bring that credibility. And then we found ourselves caught off guard because we made this, in hindsight, pretty poor video on agility training. It was something that I cobbled together using. I don't even think the program runs anymore. What was that program that used to come on the Microsoft computers where you edited your?
It
Was
was
it Movie Maker?
it was on MS
Yeah,
DOS, I think.
Yeah, it was MS-DOS,
Yeah.
Movie Maker. It was this horrendous video on agility training, and somehow it found its way to over 1 million views.
Mm.
And we thought, hey, this thing actually has legs. And then we kind of launched into it a little more. But we, as we perhaps should have foreseen, ran into a bit of an issue with time because at the time, Sandan was doing his doctorate of physiotherapy. Jared and I were doing our PhD, and Ryan Letter was doing his honors. And so we actually kind of scaled back for a little while, a lot of us. And Ryan, you took up the slack a little. So what have we been doing for the last couple of years? And can you talk us about kind of how you've been captaining the helm, if you will?
Yeah, well, I was late to join the party, so I'm the newest, if you like, member of the team. Having jumped on board after I finished my honors, and then sort of through that process, um, started to post, trying to provide some information to the general public, if you like, anyone that wants it, basically, in a way that sort of, like Sandon said, is easy to digest. Because again, it's pretty boring reading research articles, and we can all agree on that. And we spent a fair bit of time doing that with our different projects that we've done. So, yeah, over the last couple of years, trying to, if we think of something or something's quite popular in the media, trying to provide some information around what's actually going on from a sports science perspective. So be it, a fad about weightlifting, for example, um, and someone online's giving you all this information and none of it's true, then we're trying to just give you that information from a more of a research perspective to try and inform you to make the best decision you can about the training that you're doing. So that's sort of where my line of posting and information is coming from, to try and provide that information from a more critical perspective, from a research perspective, trying to give you the best information you can to make the choice that's best for you and your training.
And I think that's really how we arrived at this podcast. So as I mentioned, we're all relatively time poor, and we thought, well, what's another way to get this information out to people in something that's a little more digestible, on drives, commutes, rides, runs, whatever. And so we arrived at this um, podcast, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Um, and say that we really hoped to start this podcast as a way to spread some information about sports science, but also share information from other sports scientists and add value to you. So, um, guys, please feel free to chime in at any point. But what we're hoping to do is have segments really based around sports science. So we might have have kind of an article of the week, or a piece of technology of the week, or a piece of play of the week, which we'll kind of look at. And it might be, as Jared mentioned earlier, about heart rate on kinetics, or Sandan might talk us through about knee replacement or whatever it is. Um, those kind of things. We really want to have some involvement with you. So we are extra keen to be having listener questions. So questions where you ask us questions about how you might periodize your training, or how you might recover in a certain ways, or add muscle mass, or whatever it might be.
Or even just something that you guys have heard of during your week that we wouldn't have. We're not across everything, so bring it to us and we can have a look at it, and we can hopefully provide some level of evidence for or against, or neutrally for it.
And that's a really critical point, which I was hoping to work in later, is that at, through our training as sports scientists, and doing degrees and post degrees, including up to doctorates, we're not above criticism, and we're not always right. And that's something that's really going to be true in this podcast, that we might make mistakes, but it's not meant with any malice. We're trying to give you information and trying to make you better, better athletes, coaches, sports science students, or whatever. Um, and that's really part of the process. And that's something that I've found online, which I've really been disappointed in. There's a lot of people selling snake oil. They say that this is the way you do it. You have to pulse with these weights, or stand on these green dots, or swirl a rope around, or drink this supplement, or it has to have this acronym associated with it, or it's not real sports science. And it's all kind of surface level deep. Once you ask these people questions um, about their methodology, they usually block you from social media. And so we didn't want to be that. And so we've kind of thought, well, this is a good way to open it. And the other thing we want to do is share some of not only our expertise, but other expertise. So getting in guests to talk about their sports science journey. So not only about how they might have ended up academically, but answer questions about research, training, nutrition, testing, whatever it might be. Um, and of course, this is episode 0. Like, this is probably going to change, but but that's where we're trying to start. And I think that's a good place for us to start. Boys, I've
Mhm.
spoken too much. Does anyone else want to chime in and save this train derailment?
No, I think, yeah. Go, Letty, you're up.
Thanks, Bazza.
Yeah.
I think the key here, and you've touched on it, a lot of people online get a bit sensitive when you start asking them questions about their methodologies. I think what we've learned over the years is that we're not going to have the answer to everything, and we're going to be wrong with some things. And we don't. If we're wrong, we'll admit that we're wrong. Um, and I think that sort of separates us a little bit. That we don't care if you're going to call us out. If you've got evidence to say what we're telling you is wrong, we'd rather hear that than give everyone poor evidence about something. So I think, yeah, we don't mind being challenged, and we're not going to block you if you're going to try and challenge us. Like,
Yeah, you might even
bring it
call
on for it.
me.
Like,
call
Yeah.
me a wallaby on a YouTube channel, even, or such comments like that. That
At
happened.
the end of the day, we want to basically give you guys free information to try and help you train. You know, this is something that we've all studied in and researched in, and we've got extra knowledge that most individuals that train or play sport don't have, and we want to give it away for free, basically. So,
Take it.
I mean, if you want to take it, you can. If you don't have to. And I think that's something that we've learned, that like, if you're going to criticize us, that's fine. It's probably going to make us think about things differently and probably improve the way that we do things, both professionally and potentially personally as well.
At the end of the day, we don't know everything, and we're all here to learn and to keep learning. And I think that's what it's all about: sharing knowledge for others to learn, and sharing knowledge for ourselves to learn.
But also, fellas, we're here to have a bit of fun, and there's going to be a bit of going to be a bit of banter along the way, and some jokes and some throwbacks as well. So hopefully everybody has a bit of fun with us.
I was thinking that.
Agreed.
I'm glad you say that, mate. We're going down this philosophical part. There was violins playing in the background. It was a real wounder. So to summarize,
I'd like to bring up something, Warnie.
oh
Something
yeah,
that
okay.
we've created. I don't know if you can see this.
Oh, well, this is all right. We've just made
This
the
is
executive
something
decision that the podcast is going to appear on YouTube as of
Mm,
right now.
Yes, it's a total audio medium, but let's have a look at this picture.
Yeah,
Well, let's
I
chuck it
thought
up
to
on
bring it
YouTube.
up for you guys, and if you do end up watching a video copy of this, this is what you get up to when you do research. It's not all serious stuff. It's can be a joke sometimes, and basically it's just a coffee consumption and your likelihood to spontaneously combust. So anyone that's done research probably knows that you consume a lot of caffeine throughout the day.
Mm.
And basically, yeah, this is what happens when you go a bit loopy after doing a lot of research and a lot of reading and stuff.
Oh, I love it. On your x-axis there, you got coffee consumption in liters per minute. On the
Yeah,
y-axis is productivity 0 to 100, and around the 70 liters per minute of coffee mark is practically Tony Stark zone. But
exactly.
anywhere above 80% is death zone. So
Yeah,
I reckon I've
the fine
been
line.
somewhere around 60 to 80,
Yeah,
practically Iron Man.
yeah.
Practically.
You wish, Warnie.
uh,
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll recap very quickly. Um, we've done a lot of training. We're here to talk about sports science. We want to have a bit of fun along the way. What we want you to do is like, share, subscribe. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and our website. And you can send us some listener questions. So we are really keen to hear about what you want to learn about. We are keen to hear about your suggestions for topics, and also who you might like us to try and interview along the way also. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to episode 0, or our pre-episode of the Sports Science Collective podcast. Signing out.
cheers, boys.
You.